Peace, family. It's your boy Zay-P, Zay-P that I am. I am that I am, as you are that you are, for we are all that we are. From the individual to the many, for the many is the all, and the all is one. So I'm back with another video for you today. Today I kind of wanted to just chop it up real quick and talk a little bit about stories. I wanted to share some insights on stories and the stories we tell. So, quiet as kept, I don't know how many of you are aware, I speak light language. Now, for those who don't know, light language is a form of communication from the soul, or as many religious people might call it, the Holy Ghost. Back in the day, some people might have even called it speaking in tongues, which has a scary connotation for those who are very religious, but it's a tradition throughout the history of man, of people who have been communicating with spirit and able to access the ability to express honestly from the soul. Now, the thing about light language is a form of communication that is much more advanced than human language. The issue with human language is that it's so limited. Even English, really, if you know a lot about just verbal linguistics throughout culturally throughout history, you would see that the fact that we have 26 letters, 26 characters in our alphabet is only half the story. We should have 52. There's 52 weeks in a year. The synchronistic number is always 52. 26 is exactly half of that. There is half. That just demonstrates half of our ability to communicate is lessened, is diminished by at least 50%. And this goes across the board for most languages. So that said, light language is a form of direct communication from soul to soul. It's through soul expression. Now, I'm only sharing this to paint the picture rather of how limited language is. And with that, as somebody who is a communicator, a trained communicator, whether I've been acting, been marketing, been in advertising, just somebody who speaks professionally and personally, I like to talk. So as somebody who is a communicator and who's very well aware of how limited language is, this comes back to the idea of the stories that we tell. The human mind creates stories nonstop. The human mind is a story-making machine. Now, what that means as it applies to your life, think about it. Even your life story is something that you share with a certain connotation. It's either negative polarized, like you've had a harsh life and you've been through bad experiences, or maybe it's positive polarized where, you've had this great, wonderful life and you feel so blessed. It can be a mix of both. We tell stories every day throughout our day. We go out into the world, we interact with others. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. And you start telling your story. Oh, I'm not doing so good. I feel bad. I'm feeling this and that. You're telling a story. The words we use have tremendous power in our psyches and in our ability to create and manifest in life. Now, with that said, it is taken so cavalier, it's taken so callously that words have power. People don't seem to understand that. We often will just throw words around and we'll say things. Many people just say things thoughtlessly, but your words are an active part of creation. The way you talk to yourself, the way you think to yourself. If you're the type of person who beats yourself up a lot, who judges yourself a lot, who often will scold yourself, these might be things you've learned from your own parents growing up, to self-criticize. This is how many of us think we get better. I'm a big self-critical person, and it's taken the last 5-6 years on this journey to really learn and identify and come to a place where I can be mindful about how I'm speaking about myself, how I'm speaking to myself, and thus watch that change in how I'm speaking about and to others. Now, the same thing occurs when we're out in this world and we're telling stories. You can feel the energy exchange through the stories we tell. You've all been in the situation before where you get into that little You ask somebody how they're doing. If they're in a negative place, they will start to share. If they're the type of person who wants to share, they're looking for some place to vent, they will share with you how bad and all of their woes. And then maybe you will try to relate with them, and you might share some of your woes, or just, I'm trying to connect. So I'm going through it too, man. Life sucks. This thing is hard. And then they come back with more of their woes, like they're trying to one up you. And then the next thing you know, you're in this weird competition, like, who's the biggest loser? Whose life sucked the most? No, my girl left me. Yeah, man, I feel you, because when my wife took the kids, I was heartbroken. Yeah, man, your wife took the kids too? That's crazy, because I just lost my job today. So, word, you lost your job? Man, I've been unemployed for 6 months. You've been unemployed for 6 months? I'm telling these people, that's why they don't want to pay me my proper minimum wage. They've been cutting on my checks. Next thing you know, you have this whole dialogue with somebody where you're just sharing each other's woes, and you're exchanging that energy. You're absorbing that energy. When you walk away from those conversations, you feel like crap, don't you? You do. Same thing happens with empowered conversation, but I'm just showing that example just as an example, just so you can see how that works in a more visceral level. So the words we use and the stories we tell have supreme power of creation in our lives. Creation works in a threefold process. First thought, then word, then deed. Inspired action, right? Like you may have the concept, you may have the conceptualization, and then you may start to express it. You may start to express it in your art. You may start to express it in your language. You may start to express it through just talking, whatever it is. But then it's the taking action part, right? Taking that inspired action. The ideas will come. The ideas will come based off of the conception, the expression, and then thought, word, and deed. Father, Son, Spirit, the triunal being. This is much of life. It works in these three layers, right? The id, the ego, the superego, the conscious, the superconscious, and the metaconscious. I believe that's the term. Mind, body, and soul. So all of these, this is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. All of these three aspects of creation, these three aspects of God, they play in our life. And when we walk around mindlessly, not being aware of the words that we're saying, the ways that we're saying it, you're actively creating. But you may not be aware of what you're creating. If you're speaking negativity, you are creating negativity. You are building and adding to negative energy, which will eventually start to manifest into the physical. So with that said, the stories we tell are supremely powerful. The stories we tell about ourselves, about our lives. Have you had a harsh life? For another example, I can tell you a story about a young man. He was born in the hood. He was born with a debilitating disease, disabled with sickle cell, born in the hood with statistics that said, he was gonna be shot or killed or dead and in jail before the age of 21. In a common household in the hood, but full of abuse and trauma and a very painful upbringing. Now, I could tell you this story very negatively. I can tell you the story from a victim mentality of how unfair it was, the brutality, the trauma, all of the negativity that can be seen in that story. And I did tell that story for many, many years. And it was very disempowering. It took away my power. It made me a victim. Now, when you start to switch your lens, I can tell you that same story of a young man who was born in the hood, quote unquote, with this disease, with, the odds stacked against him in an abusive, upbringing with a single parent household, et cetera, all the woe is me stuff. But I can also tell you about how that disease kept this young man off the streets. Being kept off the streets prevented him from being shot and ended up in dead. The trauma and pains that he went through prepared him for a life of being a productive, prosperous parent, prepared him for a life of being the dad that he wished he had growing up. I could tell you this story in a much more empowered way, that when you hear it, you can hear words of wisdom, you can hear insight, you can hear prosperity and abundance, and you can see growth. You can see wisdom through that entire experience. It's no longer a victim story. It's become an empowered story. And there's a shift that happens in one's life when you stop telling victim stories, when you stop telling these stories of woe is me and how harsh it is, when you can change that lens of perception, which is directly affected by your perspective. But when you can start to change that lens of your perception, the way you perceive things, from a negative polarization to a positive polarization, where you can actually start to see the benefits, whether it's a hindsight type of thing or whatever it is, when you can step away, assume the higher perspective, and actually glean a little bit of wisdom, then you're able to tell more empowered stories. And from these empowered places, you're able to create better for yourself, better lives, better, just better. You're able to create more growth, more sovereignty, which is what we are all striving for. This is the soul's mission, for growth. We have experiences, all sorts of experiences, good and bad, all of it leading and adding to the development of our souls. Everyone is striving for more. Everyone is striving to grow and become more and to get closer to their own source, their source self. We're all striving towards that, whether you know it or not. With that said, human nature is always working towards growth. If you're telling stories that are disempowering about yourself, about your life, if you are judging yourself, being harshly critical, if you are tearing people down, if you are just inserting negative energy into your communication, into your expression, into your stories, the stories that you tell, you are creating negative. You are creating that which you do not want. Be mindful of the stories you tell. Be mindful of how you present yourself to the world. Step more towards the gratitude. Step more towards the light. Step more towards the abundance that you wish to embody. For you have access to all of these things. You have it in you to call all of these things forth. But when you're telling negative stories, when you're telling disempowered stories, you're calling forth the exact opposite. You're calling forth more of that victim mentality, more of that disempowerment. You're calling forth more of the trauma, more of the horrors. You're holding on to that and you're manifesting it in your physical experience. So if you're looking for a little tip or trick to manifestation, if you're looking for a little insight of how your life can start to change, take this as your message. Consider how you speak. Consider the things you say, the ways you say them. Be mindful of the stories you tell. There is power there. There's power of creation in our words. And if you are not using that power wisely, then you are using that power for destruction. But that destruction is only for yourself. Is your destruction you're going to feel. You may feel like, okay, you can be using it negatively, somebody talking shit about you, blah, 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 bochinche, all of that stuff. You're creating more negative energy that ultimately is going to be experienced by you. That which you create will always come back to you, regardless of whether it affects others or not. Somebody could be talking crap about you, and you can know that they're putting out that negative energy. Understand that will revisit them as well. So, just a word for the wise. Be mindful of the stories you tell. There's power of creation in our words. All right. So that's it. It's your boy Zay. I'm out. Peace.